My brother looked me in the eyes and said, "You need to leave. This is my house now and I don't want you here anymore. You're a burden." I was 68 years old, standing in the house I'd lived in for 40 years, the house our parents left to both of us. I quietly packed my bags and left without a fight. But what I did next didn't just destroy him, it destroyed his entire carefully constructed life. And I'm glad you're here with me to hear this story. Please like this video and let me know which city you're listening from so I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Elena Hayes. I'm 70 years old now and I live in a beautiful condo in San Diego, California. But 2 years ago, I was homeless, betrayed by my own brother, kicked out of my childhood home with nowhere to go. This is the story of how the brother who thought he'd gotten away with everything lost absolutely everything, and how the burden he threw away became the architect of his complete destruction. Let me take you back to where it all started. I grew up in Pasadena, California, in a beautiful craftsman house that my parents, Robert and Marie Hayes, bought in 1962. It was a 4-bedroom house with a wraparound porch, beautiful garden, in a neighborhood that became more valuable with every passing year. My brother, Richard, is 3 years older than me. He was always the golden child, the son, the one my father pinned all his hopes on. I was the daughter, the one expected to be quiet, helpful, and not ask for too much. My parents were old-fashioned. Dad was an engineer, Mom was a homemaker. They believed in traditional gender roles. Richard would inherit the important things, the business assets, the valuable items. I would get whatever was left over, and I should be grateful for it. Richard went to UCLA, studied business, married a woman named Stephanie from a wealthy family, and started a commercial real estate company. They had 2 children, Bradley and Vanessa, who are now in their 30s. Richard did well for himself, built a successful business, always had money, always had status. I took a different path. I went to community college, became a registered nurse, and dedicated my life to helping people. I married young at 24 to a man named James. We had 1 daughter, Sophie. James was a good man, a mechanic, worked hard, loved our daughter. We were happy, not wealthy, but comfortable. When Sophie was 12, James was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He fought for 2 years and I took care of him while working full-time as a nurse. The medical bills destroyed us financially. We lost our small house. We burned through our savings. When James died, I was 48 years old, widowed, emotionally destroyed, and nearly bankrupt. That's when my parents stepped in. "Elena, come home," my mother said. "Move back into the house. You can help us as we get older and you'll have a place to live." So I did. I moved back into my childhood home with my teenage daughter. Sophie finished high school there, went to college, became a teacher, got married, moved to Oregon, and I stayed. I stayed and took care of my aging parents. For 15 years, I was their full-time caregiver. I was still working as a nurse, doing 12-hour shifts at the hospital, coming home and taking care of Mom and Dad, cooking, cleaning, managing their medications, driving them to appointments, bathing them when they couldn't do it themselves, sitting with them in hospitals during emergencies. Richard visited maybe once a month. He'd show up for Sunday dinner, stay for 2 hours, tell our parents how busy he was with his important business, then leave. He contributed nothing to their care. No time, no physical help, barely any emotional support. But in my father's eyes, Richard could do no wrong. He was the successful son, the businessman, the one carrying on the Hayes name. When Dad's dementia got bad, I was the one who sat up with him during his confused, frightened nights. When Mom had her stroke, I was the one who learned physical therapy techniques, helped her relearn how to speak, how to walk. Richard sent flowers. He sent fruit baskets. He sent his assistant to check on things. Our parents' lawyer, Arnold Peterson, who'd handled their affairs for 30 years, watched all of this. He saw who was actually present, who was actually sacrificing. When my parents updated their will in 2015, Arnold advised them carefully. Dad died in 2018. I held his hand when he passed. Richard was in Las Vegas at a business conference. He made it back 2 days later for the funeral arrangements. Mom died in 2020 during COVID. I was there in full PPE, holding her hand through plastic gloves, because Richard was immunocompromised and couldn't risk exposure. She died with me alone by her side, telling her I loved her, promising I'd take care of everything. The will reading was 2 weeks after Mom's funeral. Richard showed up in an expensive suit, confident, already planning what he'd do with his inheritance. I showed up exhausted, grieving, wearing the same black dress I'd worn to both funerals. Arnold Peterson read the will in his office. The assets were substantial. The house, now worth $1.8 million due to the Pasadena real estate boom. Investment accounts worth about $400,000. Personal property, jewelry, my mother's art collection. Arnold cleared his throat and began. Robert and Marie Hayes, being of sound mind, leave their estate as follows. The house at 1247 Maple Drive is to be held in joint ownership by their children, Richard Hayes and Elena Hayes, with the stipulation that Elena maintains primary residence as long as she wishes, in recognition of her years of devoted care. Richard's face tightened, but he stayed quiet. Joint ownership meant he couldn't sell without my agreement. Arnold continued. The investment accounts are to be divided equally between Richard and Elena. The personal property is to be divided as the children mutually agree. 50-50, everything split equally. Richard was furious. I could could see it in his jaw, in his white knuckles gripping the armrest. After the meeting in the parking lot, Richard grabbed my arm. "This is bullshit, Elena. I'm the son. I should have gotten the house outright. You manipulated them. I took care of them for 15 years, Richard. Where were you? I was building a business. I was providing for my family. Just because you had nothing better to do than play nurse doesn't mean you deserve more. The will says we split everything equally. That seems fair to me." "Fair? You've been living rent-free in that house for 15 years. You've already gotten your inheritance. That house is worth $1.8 million, Elena. My half is $900,000 tied up in a property I can't sell because you have squatters' rights." "It's not squatters' rights. It's my home. Our parents wanted me to have a place to live." "Well, maybe you should buy me out then. Give me my $900. Zero and you can have the whole house." "Richard, I'm a nurse. I don't have $900,000. You know that. Then we sell it and split the money." "I don't want to sell it. It's my home. I've lived here for 15 years. Mom and Dad wanted me to stay here." "We'll see about that," he said and walked away. For the first year after Mom died, Richard left me alone. We split the investment accounts, $200,000 each. I put mine in savings, still working as a nurse, living quietly in the house, maintaining it, paying the property taxes and utilities from my salary. But Richard was planning. I found out later he'd been meeting with lawyers, looking for ways to force the sale of the house. The joint ownership with my residency clause was ironclad, but Richard was determined to find a loophole. The pressure started subtly. He'd call and say things like, "Elena, you're getting older. Do you really want to maintain that big house alone? Wouldn't a nice apartment be easier?" Or, "The property taxes are going to keep going up. How long can you afford them on a nurse's salary?" I ignored him. I loved that house. It was full of memories of my parents, of my daughter growing up, of James before he got sick. I wasn't leaving. Then Richard got more aggressive. He started showing up unannounced with real estate agents. "Just getting it appraised," he'd say. "We need to know what it's worth for insurance purposes." But I'd hear him in the yard with agents, discussing lot value, teardown potential, development opportunities. Then came the lawsuit. Richard filed a partition action, a legal proceeding to force the sale of jointly owned property. His argument was that the property couldn't be fairly divided, that it needed to be sold and the proceeds split. I hired a lawyer, Patricia Gomez, using a chunk of my inheritance money. Patricia reviewed the will carefully. "Elena, your parents' will specifically states you maintain primary residence as long as you wish. That's unusual language. Most joint ownership doesn't have that clause. It's going to be very hard for Richard to force a sale while you're alive and want to stay there." The partition lawsuit dragged on for 6 months. Court dates, depositions, legal fees mounting. Patricia was right. The judge was reluctant to force me out of my home when the will explicitly protected my residency. Richard's lawyers argued it was economically unfair to him, that his inheritance was being held hostage. My lawyer countered that Richard had gotten $200,000 cash immediately, that he was a wealthy businessman who didn't need the money, that his elderly sister deserved the security of her home. The judge finally ruled in my favor. The house would remain jointly owned. I could stay as long as I wanted, and Richard's petition for forced sale was denied. I won, but it cost me $35,000 in legal fees, and it made Richard absolutely venomous with rage. He called me the night the judgment came through. "You're going to regret this, Elena. You think you won. You just made an enemy. I will make your life hell until you leave that house." "Richard, why are you doing this? You don't need the money. Your business is successful. Can't you just let me have this one thing?" "It's the principle. That's my inheritance too, and I'm not going to let you steal it from me." He hung up. The harassment started immediately. Richard would drive by the house at random times, slowly, menacingly. He'd call the city and report false code violations, overgrown yard, unpermitted modifications, anything he could think of. I'd get citations I'd have to fight. He convinced the HOA, which he was friendly with because he'd done real estate deals with several board members, to suddenly start enforcing rules that had been ignored for years. My fence was 6 inches too tall. My mailbox was the wrong color. My garden shed needed permits from 1985. Every month brought new harassment, new legal threats, new attempts to make living in the house unbearable. Then 18 months ago, Richard's strategy changed. He stopped calling, stopped harassing, stopped showing up. For 2 months, total silence. I thought maybe he'd finally given up, moved on. I should have known better. One morning, I came home from my night shift at the hospital, exhausted as always. I pulled into the driveway and saw Richard's car parked in front. He was sitting on the porch steps, waiting for me. "Elena, we need to talk." "Richard, I'm exhausted. I've been working for 12 hours. Whatever it is, can it wait?" "No, it can't. Let me inside." I unlocked the door. We went into the living room, the room where we'd grown up, where Mom used to read to us, where Dad watched football on Sundays. Richard sat down, pulled out a folder of papers. "Elena, I'm going to be direct. I want you out of this house. I found a legal mechanism to make it happen, but I'm offering you a choice first." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "I've been going through Dad's papers, the original property documents. There's an obscure California property law about joint tenancy and elder financial abuse. If I can can demonstrate that you unduly influenced our parents while they were elderly and infirm, that you manipulated them into giving you residency rights you didn't deserve, I can have the will contested and the residency clause removed. That's insane. I took care of them. I didn't manipulate anyone. You were their caregiver. You had access. You had influence. You were there when Arnold Peterson discussed the will updates. A good lawyer could make a case for undue influence. It would be ugly, Elena. It would drag mom and dad's names through the mud. It would suggest you were a predatory caregiver, but I'll do it if I have to. I felt sick. You would destroy our parents' reputation to get me out of this house. I want what's mine. So here's your choice. You can leave voluntarily. Sign over your half of the house to me. I'll give you $100,000 as a settlement. That's more than fair for someone who's gotten free housing for 15 years. Take the money, find an apartment, and we end this cleanly. And if I say no, then I file the contest. I drag you through years of court. I make sure everyone knows you were a manipulative caregiver who stole from her own parents. You'll lose eventually and you'll get nothing. So what's it going to be? I was 68 years old. I was tired. I'd been fighting Richard for 2 years. The thought of more legal battles, more stress, more money on lawyers was overwhelming. Can I think about it? You have 2 weeks. Sign the papers or I file the contest. Your choice. He left the papers on the coffee table and walked out. I sat there for hours staring at those papers. I called my daughter, Sophie, in Oregon. She was furious. Mom, don't sign anything. He's bluffing. Get Patricia on the phone. But when I called Patricia and explained Richard's threat, she was honest with me. Elena, he could file that contest. Would he win? Probably not. Your care was legitimate. The will was properly executed. Arnold will testify that your parents were of sound mind. But Richard's right about one thing. It would be ugly, expensive, and take years. You'd be looking at $100,000 in legal fees easy, maybe more. I don't have $100,000 anymore. I spent most of my inheritance on the first lawsuit. I know, that's the trap he's put you in. He's wealthy enough to fund years of litigation. You're not. He's betting you'll give up rather than fight. I had 2 weeks to decide. 2 weeks of barely sleeping, barely eating, playing out scenarios in my head. Keep fighting and potentially lose everything, including my reputation, or take the $100,000 and find a new place to live. On day 13 I made my decision. I called Richard. I'll sign, but I need time to find a place and move. Give me 3 months. You have 6 weeks. And you move out before you get the money. I'm not giving you a chance to change your mind and squat. Richard, I need time to pack 40 years of belongings. 6 weeks, Elena. Sign the papers today or the offer disappears. I signed. I hated myself for it, but I signed. Patricia witnessed it, shaking her head. Elena, I think this is a mistake. We could fight this. I can't afford to fight anymore. I'm too tired. The next 6 weeks were hell. I was working full time, trying to pack decades of possessions, trying to find an affordable apartment in the San Diego area where I worked. The housing market was insane. My $200,000 in remaining inheritance, plus the $100,000 from Richard, meant I had about $285,000 after taxes and fees. Not enough to buy anything decent in Southern California. I found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable area, $2,200 a month. I signed a lease. I packed everything I could fit, put the rest in storage, and tried not to cry every time I looked at the walls where my daughter's growth chart was marked, where my parents' pictures hung, where my life had happened. Richard showed up on moving day with his lawyer and a notary. Keys, he demanded. I handed them over. He handed me a cashier's check for $100,000. Pleasure doing business with you, sis. Now get out. I have contractors coming tomorrow to start renovations. I left. Sophie had flown down to help me move and she was crying with rage. Mom, he can't do this. There has to be something. It's done, honey. Let's just go. I moved into my sad little apartment and felt like my life was over. I was 68, alone, living in a place that wasn't home, knowing my brother had stolen everything from me and there was nothing I could do about it. But then something happened, something I didn't expect. I got angry, really, truly, deeply angry. I'd spent my whole life being the good daughter, the patient sister, the one who didn't make waves. I'd taken care of everyone else and accepted scraps. And what had it gotten me? Betrayed by my own brother and thrown out of my home. I started thinking about everything Richard had said and done, and I started thinking about everything I knew about Richard that maybe I hadn't paid attention to before. Richard's business, Hayes Commercial Properties, had been successful, but how successful? Where did the money actually come from? I remembered snippets of conversations at family dinners over the years. Richard bragging about deals, about partnerships, about investments. I started doing research. Public records are amazing when you know where to look. Property records, business filings, court records, all public information. I discovered that Hayes Commercial Properties had 3 major partners. Richard, a man named Donald Marsh, and a woman named Patricia Lynn, equal thirds. They'd been partners for 20 years, building a commercial real estate portfolio worth about $40 million. I also discovered that the company had been involved in some questionable deals. Nothing prosecuted, but there were lawsuits from tenants alleging harassment to force rent increases, from small business owners claiming predatory lease terms, from contractors claiming they'd been stiffed on payments. Richard's reputation in the business community was mixed. Successful, yes, but also ruthless, possibly unethical. Then I found something interesting. A lawsuit from 2019, settled out of court, sealed records. A former business partner named James Corrigan had sued Hayes Commercial Properties for fraud. The details were sealed, but the filing mentioned misrepresentation of property values, forged documents, and misappropriation of partnership funds. The suit had been settled for an undisclosed amount with a non-disclosure agreement, but the fact that it existed meant something had happened, something Richard had paid to keep quiet. I kept digging. I created a spreadsheet of every property Hayes Commercial owned, every deal they'd done in the past 10 years, every partner they'd worked with. I was looking for patterns, for inconsistencies, for anything suspicious, and I found something. Several properties that Hayes Commercial claimed to own free and clear actually had complicated ownership structures with offshore LLCs. Properties that should have been worth millions were listed on tax documents as worth much less. Money flowing through shell companies that didn't seem to have any legitimate business purpose. I'm not a forensic accountant, I'm a nurse, but even I could see that Richard's business had some very questionable financial structures that looked designed to hide money, avoid taxes, or possibly commit fraud. I compiled everything I'd found into a detailed report. Then I did something I'd never imagined I'd do. I sent anonymous tips to 3 organizations: the IRS, the California Franchise Tax Board, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I included copies of every public record I'd found, highlighted the suspicious patterns, and pointed out the sealed fraud lawsuit from 2019. I suggested that Hayes Commercial Properties might be worth investigating for tax evasion, fraud, and potentially money laundering. Then I waited. For 6 months nothing happened. I went to work, came home to my depressing apartment, talked to Sophie on the phone, and tried to build a new life. I figured my tip had gone nowhere, that Richard would get away with everything like he always did. But then, 9 months after I'd sent those tips, I got a call from Patricia Gomez, my lawyer. "Elena, have you seen the news? Your brother's company is being raided by the FBI." I turned on the TV. Breaking news: federal agents executing search warrants at Hayes Commercial Properties, seizing documents, computers, financial records. Richard being led out of his office building by FBI agents, not arrested but definitely being questioned. The news reported that Hayes Commercial was under investigation for tax fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. The investigation had been triggered by an anonymous tip 9 months earlier and had been building a case ever since. I watched my brother on TV, looking panicked and furious, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The investigation took another year. During that time, more details emerged. Richard and his partners had been running an elaborate scheme to defraud investors, underreport property values to avoid taxes, and siphon money through shell companies. The sealed lawsuit from 2019, the former partner had discovered some of the fraud and threatened to go public. Richard had paid him $2 million to stay quiet, using company funds, which was itself another crime. Donald Marsh and Patricia Lynn, Richard's partners, started cooperating with investigators immediately, turning on Richard to save themselves. They claimed Richard had masterminded everything, that they'd been misled, that they had evidence of his crimes. Richard was indicted on 14 counts of fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. His assets were frozen. His business collapsed. The properties were seized or sold off to pay creditors and victims. His wife, Stephanie, filed for divorce immediately. She'd come from money and had kept her assets separate. She took their kids and moved out before the scandal could touch her family's reputation. Richard's adult children, Bradley and Vanessa, released a statement saying they were shocked and disappointed and were cooperating fully with authorities. They were protecting their own futures, distancing themselves from their father's crimes. The trial happened 14 months after the FBI raid. I attended every single day, sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching my brother's empire burn. The prosecution was thorough and devastating. They showed years of fraudulent documents, fake appraisals, sham transactions. They showed emails where Richard explicitly discussed hiding money from the IRS. They showed him directing his partners to lie to investors about property values. The former partner who'd sued in 2019, James Corrigan, testified under immunity. He detailed how Richard had forged his signature on documents, had stolen money from their joint ventures, had threatened him when he discovered the fraud. Richard's own partners testified against him, claiming he'd fooled them too, though nobody believed them. They were just trying to reduce their own sentences. Richard was convicted on 12 of 14 counts. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay $18 million in restitution to victims and the government. 12 years. He was 71 years old. He'd likely die in prison. His assets were liquidated to pay restitution. Everything, including the house he'd stolen from me, the house he'd renovated and planned to sell for a massive profit, seized by the federal government and sold at auction. I went to the auction. The house sold for $2.1 million. Every penny went to Richard's victims and the government. Richard got nothing. nothing. His wife got nothing because she'd divorced him. His kids got nothing because they'd renounced him. After the sentencing, I did something I'd planned for months. I wrote Richard a letter. The prison screened it, but they let it through. Dear Richard, I wanted you to know something. I'm the one who turned you in. I'm the anonymous tip that destroyed your life. After you kicked me out of our parents' house, after you stole my home and threw me away like garbage, I got angry. And when I get angry, I get thorough. I spent months researching your business, finding every questionable deal, every suspicious transaction, every pattern that didn't make sense. Then I handed it all to the FBI. You thought I was just a stupid old nurse, didn't you? You thought I was weak and ignorant and easily manipulated. You treated me like a burden, like something worthless to be discarded. But I was a critical care nurse for 40 years, Richard. I'm trained to notice patterns, to spot problems, to investigate thoroughly, and to take decisive action. You should have remembered that. You stole my home. I destroyed your life. I'd say we're even, but honestly, you deserved worse. I hope 12 years gives you time to think about what you did. Not just to me, but to Mom and Dad, whose memory you dishonored, to the people you defrauded, to your own family who wants nothing to do with you now. I'll be 80 when you get out. Maybe I'll still be alive to see it. Maybe not. Either way, I'll die knowing I got justice. You underestimated me. That was your biggest mistake. Elena, I never got a response. I didn't need one. The house sold at auction, but something unexpected happened. The buyer was a property investor who'd read about the case. He contacted me through Patricia Gomez. Ms. Hayes, I'm aware of what happened to you. I bought the property as an investment, but I feel some responsibility to make things right. Your parents wanted you to have a home. I'd like to offer you first right to rent the property at a substantially below market rate for as long as you want. Consider it making amends for how the system failed you. I was stunned. Why would you do that? Because my mother was a nurse. She took care of people her whole life and died with almost nothing because she gave everything to others. Your story reminded me of her. This is what I can do to honor her memory. I moved back into my parents' house 6 months ago. I pay $1,200 a month in rent, far below market value. The investor, whose name is Michael Chen, has become a friend. He says when he eventually sells the property, he'll give me a year's notice and help me find somewhere else. But for now, I'm home. I'm back in the house where I grew up, where I raised my daughter, where I took care of my parents. The house Richard tried to steal from me. Richard is in federal prison in Central California. He's appealing his sentence, but every appeal has been denied. His wife remarried last year. His children visit him once a year out of obligation, but they've made it clear they want nothing to do with him. The $100,000 he gave me for signing over the house, the federal government tried to claw it back as proceeds of crime, but Patricia argued successfully that it was my legitimate inheritance that Richard had paid me for my share. I got to keep it. I'm 70 years old now. I retired from nursing last year. I volunteer at a free clinic twice a week. I see my daughter and grandchildren regularly. I live in my childhood home surrounded by memories of the people I loved. And my brother, the one who called me a burden, the one who threw me out with nowhere to go, sits in a cell and will for another 11 years. People ask me if I feel guilty, if I regret destroying my brother's life. The answer is simple, no. Richard destroyed his own life. I just held up a mirror and showed the world who he really was. He committed crimes. He defrauded people. He stole money. He deserved to be caught, and he deserved to be punished. If he hadn't kicked me out, if he hadn't treated me like garbage, if he hadn't stolen my home, would I have looked into his business? Probably not. I would have lived my quiet life and never known what he was doing. But he did kick me out. He did treat me like garbage, and that was his fatal mistake. The lesson here isn't complicated. Don't underestimate people. Don't assume that being quiet means being weak. Don't assume that someone who spent their life caring for others doesn't have steel underneath. My brother thought I was a burden to be discarded. He found out I was an enemy he should have feared. So what would you do if your family member betrayed you, stole from you, threw you away like garbage? Would you accept it? Would you walk away? Or would you do what I did, get angry, get thorough, and get justice? Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds someone out there that being underestimated is sometimes an advantage, that patience and thoroughness can be weapons, and that karma is real, especially when you help karma along. Please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and let me know what city you're listening from, because your story matters too. And maybe you're dealing with someone who underestimated you. Remember, the people who treat you as disposable often have secrets they're desperate to hide, and sometimes the best revenge is just shining a light on the truth.